All right, so, and I'm also going to record this just for the sake of being totally comprehensive. So I'm recording this Zoom meeting, and that'll still be there. But now I'm over on the YouTube live stream. So I want to see some of you guys start to migrate over. Let's see. So far we have 0, but hopefully I'll see all of you guys moving over there in a minute. So I'll just put this in the chat for those that arrive a few moments late. Okay, cool. So you can run 2 platforms too if you want. I mean, if you like having 2 windows open, you can do that, or you can just stay on Zoom if you choose. But Foster, one thing I'm going to tell you is I'm typing the comments into the YouTube. It says, do you need to be signed in? I don't know, Kyle, do you? Only you would know that. Just go to the YouTube live stream, and I think you'll probably be able to watch it. It's just open for anybody. You see the link that I put above? It's in the chat here, the youtube.com. There you should see it, and just click that, and you'll see the live stream. But I'll wait for everybody to make their move. Kyle, are you having a better chance now? Hi, Peter. Hi, Ha. Okay, good. Thank you, Kyle. So go to the YouTube live stream. Go there now. Hello. Okay. And once I see that we have, the numbers that we want, then I'll just start this meeting. So it's recording both. I'm going to post both, and you'll just have your pick of the litter, which ones that you want to use. But there are certain advantages and benefits to the YouTube form, because the playback is better, the live chat is recorded, and so there's no need to save the notes, upload them, and then they'll be in a different place than the video itself. So so this is what I want to do today, because I did have some students saying, yeah, it would be nice to have the live chat on record, and it would be nice to have the full screen playback, which I was not able to do because of buffering, file size limit issues. So now we should be all good on all that. The preferred chat is YouTube, only YouTube. I'm not going to type anything into the other chat. So that's the deal. Okay, so people that have arrived to Zoom, all you guys that are here in Zoom, you can keep running the Zoom, but it might be hard on your computer. So you can also just go to this YouTube thing now and close the Zoom, because I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to be talking on YouTube. Okay, cool. So thanks, everybody. Let's continue then. Go ahead and leave your attendance thing here in the YouTube live chat, and that'll just be my way of making sure that everybody was present. You can also leave it in the Zoom chat if you want. You can use either chat. I'll see it in both. So, I mean, to those that just want to stick with Zoom, it's fine. But I'm using either one. And I'll have the records for both, so it's no worries on that. Okay, great. So then, guys, let's continue with our class meetings. What we're going to do today is go over Chapter 4. And also, just to note, I've returned responses to, I think, everybody who emailed me, at least prior to today. If somebody got a message into me today, I might still need to get to you. But for most all members of the class that asked for their grades, I've been able to respond. I like to do it that way because I can keep it personalized for each individual, and I can share the scanned images of your work. So that's my preferred way to release and return student scores, by individual student request, and then I send them their detailed information and their grade breakdown. I don't like to use Canvas for its gradebook or any of those other things, just because it's happened in the past that it's been hacked a few times. Yes, Foster, if you just read the message, it contains those details. It shows you the 3 scores. It shows the extra credit score, and you can simply read the message and you'll see that. So yes, it does. So anyway then, guys, we're continuing on through the class. We're going to talk about Chapter 4 today. And on Tuesday, if we have any need to finish the last few notes of Chapter 4, we'll do it there. But I'm going to send the study guide for the midterm over the weekend, probably tomorrow morning. And then you'll be able to use that study guide to guide you through the review sessions that we will hold next week, and to get ready for the midterm that happens the following Tuesday. So we've got our plan pretty much set forth. We're going to finish Chapter 4 today, and the early part of Tuesday, have 1.5 meetings dedicated to review sessions, and then you'll have your exam to take that following Tuesday. So yes, do go to YouTube to watch live right now. That's correct, Kelvin. Go to the YouTube. If you're still on Zoom, that's fine, but I kind of don't know why. Just go to YouTube. Okay, thank you. Hi. Haha, funny. So then, let me get us started with chapter 4. Chapter 4 is all about knowledge and the limits of knowledge. Chapter 4, knowledge and its limits. This is a topic that I'm quite interested in. My special focus as a grad student in philosophy was the theory of knowledge, or as they call it, epistemology. So that was the stuff that I focused on mostly as a student when I was getting my PhD. I'm interested in all the topics of our class: ethics, philosophy of language, and logic. But the theory of knowledge is probably my most favorite topic that I focused on. So I have a lot of interest in this. So to get started, the chapter of the book talks about certain medical mistakes that were made in the past. And it refers us to these just to kind of give us a reminder that we can all make mental mistakes and errors in judgment. Even people in highly skilled fields where there's a lot at stake can make those mistakes. And if they can make those kind of mistakes, then so can we. So we always have to remember to be aware of our possible tendencies to make errors in judgment, reach the wrong conclusions, and to sort of check ourselves against those possibilities. So what it refers to in the beginning is there in 1995, William King was a patient at a university hospital in Florida. And basically, he was scheduled to have his leg amputated because it had become gangrenous. It had become infected and it therefore was poisoning his bloodstream. So they had to get rid of that leg. And after he was placed under full anesthesia and the surgical team had prepped him for the amputation, they accidentally amputated the wrong leg, the healthy one. Okay, so that's obviously a terrible result because that means that he then had to become a double amputee. They still had to remove the other, unhealthy leg. Another case mentioned is the actor Dennis Quaid. He had newborn twins that were suffering from a blood disorder, and so they were prescribed a blood thinning medication, but they were accidentally administered a dose that was 1,000 times beyond the requirement, and so it almost killed them. And so, these types of medical errors can happen, and they're preventable. They're human mistakes, they're cognitive errors. That's actually the leading cause of medical mistakes, cognitive human error. So people try to develop, backup systems now, like safety monitors and computer and safety officers to develop precautions against these mistakes, but they can always happen. And that reminds us that even highly trained professionals in very important fields can make such mistakes. So good critical thinking requires that we be aware of our own potential to make errors. We have to be able to know what those possible errors are so that we can sort of evaluate ourselves and make sure that we, to the best of our ability, come to the correct conclusions. So knowledge. Good place to start with the, yeah, it's terrible, right, Peter? It's kind of a scary thing, but that has happened. So let's go ahead and talk about what knowledge really is. There's a definition of knowledge. You might find it surprising to know that because you could think that knowledge is something that's very hard to pin down or precisely give a definition for. But there actually is a very well-known definition that goes back thousands of years, all the way to the ancient Greeks. It was discussed by Plato and his teacher Socrates. So they think of knowledge in this way. The book gives us this definition, and this tracks with the classic definition. It is information that we believe that is true. Information that we believe which is true and for which we have justification. Okay. So in that definition, there's three big important criteria, or we could call them ingredients. Truth, belief, and justification. Sometimes people that talk a lot about knowledge, the epistemologists of the world like me, we sometimes use a acronym to summarize this definition in a little more compact way. And so you sometimes see this acronym, K equals JTB, where K, the letter, stands for knowledge. And those three letters in the acronym, JTB, each stand for one of the three conditions for knowledge: justification, J, truth, T, and belief, B. So knowledge is a justified true belief. Two of these terms we've talked about earlier in the semester, so I want to kind of get us back to talk about that again. Let me ask you guys, Go ahead and just put it in the chat. What is truth? What does it mean for a statement to be true? Someone can tell me this one. Truth has to do with a match between certain things, but you'll just let me know the rest. What is truth? Okay, good, Foster. So accurately describes reality. We could have made a little more detail, like it's when the statement accurately matches reality. Okay, when whatever the sentence says matches the facts. Correct. So I think we've talked about examples like this before, but just a quick review. If I say to you right now, I'm wearing glasses, it's true. I really am, because I'm saying it, but I'm not just saying it. There's actually glasses on my head. So it's a statement that's true. And if I tell you I'm wearing a hat, that's not a true statement. They're both statements, but one is true and the other's not because one matches the real facts and then the other one just doesn't. So statements can be true or false, but if they're true, that means that they line up with what's real and what is really happening. So truth is a requirement for knowledge. What's a belief? Someone remembers this? What's a belief? Once we've said what truth is, we can now say belief. So belief is when what? Go ahead, let me know. I know there's a little lag actually, so it takes a few seconds to type, but that's okay. What is a belief? When someone thinks that something is true. That's right. So a belief is just up to the person and their judgment. Take the statement that God exists. If you believe in God, then you say, I think so. I think it's true, that he's real. And if you don't believe that there's God, then you say to that statement, I don't think that corresponds to reality. And that's just one example of a sort of interesting and important belief to many people. Take the case of, I don't know, the earth being flat. Somebody's going to say, I think it's flat. They believe that statement is a fact. And of course, I would hope most all of us, 100%, would say, no, they don't believe that. That's a statement they don't think is correct to the facts. So beliefs are up to you, and two people can disagree about what they think is true. Say there's two jurors, and juror number one says, the fact that they're guilty, I believe it. I believe they're guilty. The other juror says, no, I think they're not guilty, and I don't believe the same thing as you. So there's only one fact. They can't both be guilty and not guilty, but the two individuals have different opinions about it or different beliefs. So our beliefs are what we think is true. And we would hope that that's usually correct, but sometimes we can have false beliefs. Like when you're a kid, maybe you believe there's a Santa Claus, and you find out later that actually there was wrong. There was no such thing. So to the best of our ability as critical thinkers, we try to form true beliefs. Now, justification, the third ingredient, that's a new one for us, but I bet you it's something that you have a sense of already. So what do you think the word justification means? If I have a justified belief, or if I say my belief is justified, what does this mean? In other words, to have a justified belief. As opposed to it being unjustified, what do you think the status of justification means? Okay, so something that you can prove based on evidence, that you have proof for it, very good, yes. So it is to have good reasons or evidence to support your belief. That's right. So here, I'll put that in this chat. Justification, having good reasons or evidence to support your belief. So suppose that you're like an investigator and you go to a crime scene and you find a shoe print that matches a shoe that the neighbor of this murdered individual owns. So if it's a rare shoe and the print matches the sole on the shoe, you can say that's evidence that he's guilty. That's evidence that he committed the crime, right? So in saying that he's the guilty party, now you're trying to say we have justification for thinking that. There would be no justification if there's no proof, but if you have some proof or reasonable evidence, whatever, then that's justification. Think of, in not just a criminal context, just an everyday life situation. You want to miss class, you say that you're too sick to attend. And the professor maybe, they're asking you for evidence to prove that. So you show them like a doctor's note, and this doctor's note gives evidence for the statement that you were sick. So now the professor has justification, and you can give this justification for the same thing. We need proof to have a reasonable basis to believe things. Without proof, we're just speculating or randomly guessing or just throwing opinions out there. Now, for you to have knowledge, the idea is that all three of these conditions have to be met. So it has to be that you think something's true, and it is. And on top of that, you have to have some type of reasons or evidence to back it up. If even one of the conditions is not satisfied, then that's not knowledge. Let me try to make that somehow reasonable to you by going through some quick discussion. So here's a question, guys. Is it possible for somebody to know that Dr. Vulich is 1,000 years old? Could somebody know that about me? What do you think? Let me hear your answer. Simple question. Could somebody know that I'm 1,000 years old? No, they couldn't. Correct. Yes, they could not know that. And why not? What's wrong with saying that's knowledge? What's missing, or which condition is not met? They could believe it, yes, but they couldn't know it because it would not be true. Exactly. I mean, it'd be hard to imagine anyone believing that. It'd have to be really far out, but it's certainly not true. And so you can't know something that is false. There's also no justification, but the more fundamental point I'm thinking of, Alan, is just that it's simply not true. There is no evidence either, right? But it's just not true. So you can't know something false. Let me give you maybe a more common sense example. Say you're taking like a multiple choice test on history or something, and the question says this: give the date that the Declaration of Independence was signed, and they have four options for you. So A says 1776, B says 1876, C says 1976, and then D says 2030. So you rule out D because you know that's the future. And now you got it down to A, B, or C. And let's say you're like, wow, I just can't remember though, but I'm going to go ahead and fill in letter B. So I think it's 1876. Now, did that person know the answer? Did that individual student know the answer when they filled in B, which says 1876 was when the Declaration was signed? Is that knowledge? No, it's not knowledge. Correct. But why isn't it knowledge? Well, it's not just that it's a guess, Brian. That's part of the problem. But more fundamentally, what's wrong with their answer? We know our dates, right? Declaration of Independence. Well, so John, first of all, John, can you please get into the YouTube and get the live chat going there? Because otherwise I'm looking at two different ones. Same to you, Josh. YouTube, click the link. You see it above here. It's okay. But just for the chat, you can leave your Zoom meeting going, but please do the chat over here. So it's simply not true, right? It's a false answer. That's not a correct answer. You guys have taken enough tests, right? You don't get credit for knowing the answer when you fill in the wrong one. So certainly you can't be claimed as knowing it when you got the wrong information. So that's what's problematic there. They filled in an answer, but it's false. So let's give another example. The student looks at the question and they narrow it down to A, B, or C, but they still don't really remember. So they just say, I'm going to guess it's A because I love the number 17. I'm 17, so I'm just going to fill in letter A. So now the person has bubbled in A, which was correct. But did that student really know the answer? Gabriel, I'll get to your question in a minute. But yes, we can know things. But let's focus on this example for a minute. So to the student that fills in A, but they're just randomly guessing, do they know the answer? Let me hear. They fill in A, but they were guessing. They were like, I guess it's A, maybe. I mean, I like the number 17, so why not? Is that knowledge or not? So it's not knowledge, but it is true. And at least when they filled it in, they believed it for the moment. So what's wrong in their case? Why do they not have knowledge? They're missing the justification condition. That's right. Well, Brian, I mean, you say they don't believe it, but at least in the moment when they filled it in, they must have believed it. Otherwise, they would have filled in a different bubble, you know? But the belief is not based on anything. That's the problem. The belief's not based on any information. So if they were told, why did you pick that? They would just say, I don't know, it was just a guess. So when does somebody actually know this answer? When they fill in the correct bubble, so they get the correct answer, it's true, and they thought it was true. So you got to think it's right, and it is right. But then third thing is this. They would also have to have the reasons in their mind when they filled it in, like, oh, I know this answer because I know all the key events, dates, historical events, and figures that built up to that time period. So having knowledge is not just lucky guesses, right? Let me give you another example to kind of just make this even clearer. Right now at Disneyland over there in Anaheim, um, there's a certain number of people that are just paying customers that are on site at Disneyland. Now, it could be an even number of people, right? Thinking about math, an even number, what is that? It's just any number divisible by 2. Um, so, what's the probability that there's an even number of people there at Disneyland right now? Some even number of people. What's the chances or the statistical probability that it's an even number right now? You can just tell me that. It's 50%. Yes, it's half. Just because that's how our number system works. Every number that's an integer is either divisible by 2 or it's not. And so it's divided into those that are either even or odd. So it's a 50-50 chance. So suppose I just love even numbers and I just sit here and I tell you, you know what, I want to believe that there are an even number of people there. Well, if I say that there's an even number of people over there at the Disneyland location, I have a 50% chance of being correct. So maybe right now I'm correct in saying that. But do you think I know that there is an even number of people there right now? Even if I'm right, I don't know it. Why not? What's missing? What's missing there? How is it not knowledge? The justification's missing. Alan, I stipulated that it's possibly true. You know it's possibly true. We went through that. It's 50% chance that it's true. But what's missing is justification. I don't have any evidence that there's an even number of people there, aside from the fact that there's a 50% chance of it. So how could I know? How could I know that this is correct? Well, in that case, oh yeah, thanks, Noah. Not to worry. I remember you and I appreciate you too. But we all have a job to do here, so I got to deal with this new group. So, but thanks. What I'm saying though is this: there's no justification. If I counted the number of people and a census was quickly conducted for all the people that live over there, sorry, that are currently on the campus or the facility, if you will, then in that case I would have knowledge because it wouldn't just be me guessing anymore, but it would be performed on the basis of like a thorough count that I had made. So yeah, I would have to at least have that information in mind for me to say I have knowledge. I don't know, aliens, do they exist? I mean, a lot of people believe so, but I don't think we know it. And the reason that we don't know it is that even though they could be out there right now, and that could be true, we don't have enough proof, right? But we could learn that that's true and get better evidence. Suppose the Mars rover starts beaming back images of like, little life forms on the surface of Mars. If that really happened, then in that case, we would say that we know something that before we were just speculating about or that we just had an opinion about. So anyway, then guys, you have to have all 3 conditions met for you to know something. Getting something right by guessing is not really knowing it. And of course, getting a wrong answer is not knowing something either. Let me go back to the first example and I'll close this discussion of JTB. So the student that fills in 1876, there's actually multiple problems with their response, why it's not knowledge. First and most fundamentally, it's just false. So it fails the truth requirement. But also consider the correct answer, 1776. This person didn't believe it. So with respect to the truth, they didn't believe it. So they fail the belief condition concerning the true fact. And concerning the thing they actually believed, it's false. So, they're not having the right setup in order to have knowledge. So I've sometimes described it like this, guys. With knowledge that people have, the 3 requirements are sort of like the ingredients of a cake. Suppose that to make a cake, you had to have sugar, flour, and water. Now, each ingredient is needed, but by itself, it's not going to be enough. So if you just have water, you have something you need for this cake, but just by itself, it's just a bucket of water. It's not going to become a cake alone. And the same with sugar. Sugar is something that needs to go into the cake, yes, but by itself, it's not going to make one. So justification, truth, and belief, each one's needed. But if you only have one and then one of the others or both are missing, it's not going to be enough to bake the cake of knowledge. So what do we have knowledge of? The things that we believe, which are true, which are supported by good evidence. Now, Gabriel, you asked, what is sufficient evidence? And I saw above you also said something similar, which was, can we ever know something? I mean, yes, I would say you can know all kinds of things. Like right now, you know that I'm wearing glasses, don't you? Wouldn't that be obvious? Because the evidence is right there in front of you. You can just look, so you have perception. But hold that thought, because actually this is going to get into something we'll talk about in just a moment. Next thing I want to speak to you all about is this. there are two different schools of thought about where most human knowledge comes from. So there's these sort of two different viewpoints on that. Yeah, but Gabriel, I'm not using a filter. I know you could be skeptical. I mean, you could be skeptical of almost anything. We talked about Descartes, right? Do you even have a body, or are you just a brain in a vat having a simulation experience right now? But I mean, at a certain point, skepticism kind of almost goes a bit too far, you know? But yeah, let's continue. Two positions on human knowledge. So in the history of philosophy, there's these two well-known schools of thinking about where most of our human knowledge comes from. And they're kind of like rival schools of thought. So the first one is known as empiricism. And what empiricism says is that most human knowledge comes from the five senses and observation. That's empiricism. So let me just discuss that first before I talk about the other type of position. All right, now, empiricism says that, yeah, most of our knowledge comes from what we can perceive with the five senses. The five senses are sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. And so what's called empirical evidence is observational evidence or perceptual evidence, things that you can somehow perceive with any of those five senses. Our sense organs, our eyes, ears, nose, and the rest are what inform us about a lot of facts about the world. And some people think that's the mainstay of where most human knowledge derives from. As an example, do we know that dinosaurs existed? Now, Gabriel, don't overthink it too much. Just in general, you know, without being too philosophical, do we know that dinosaurs existed? Let's hear your answer. Yes, for sure. And what's the evidence that they ever existed, guys? Well, Armand, you already got it. So the evidence that the dinosaurs existed are the fossilized remains that we've recovered and excavated in archaeological digs, right? When we take those fossilized remains out and we do carbon dating on them, and then we assemble them into the larger skeletal structure, we therefore have clear and compelling evidence that these life forms once roamed the earth at a certain time in the past. So that's empirical evidence, because those fossils are things that you can and that you do see, measure, and observe through your five senses. So that's like empirical evidence. Science itself crucially relies on the concept of empiricism, because science is all about investigating the world through what we can observe in it, and then trying to use those observations to build up cause and effect explanations for the natural phenomena that exist. So empiricism is huge for science, but it's also just big for everyday life. You know, if say you had a package that was delivered and UPS shows that it came to your house, but then it's not there anymore when you get home, but you see a set of footprints leading up to where the doorstep is and then away, then you might say, well, these footsteps that I can simply perceive give me good evidence to know that there was a theft of my product or my item. So a lot of knowledge comes from the five senses and observation. Sometimes we also are able to build tools or instruments to enhance our ordinary powers of perception. Take, for example, like a telescope or a microscope for vision, or I don't know, like a stethoscope or microphones or acoustics in order to augment the power of the ear to hear. So that's one viewpoint, that most of our knowledge comes from our five senses, but it's not the only view. There's also rationalism. And so this is the other school of thought about where most of our knowledge comes from. Rationalism says that most human knowledge comes from reason, ideas, and abstract thought. Okay, so consider the kind of knowledge that we have in like areas of like pure mathematics or pure geometry, pure trigonometry, or pure logic, right? For you to sit down right now and know that all the points that lie on the perimeter of a circle are equidistant from the radius at the center, that doesn't require you to get up and physically investigate anything. You can just sit back in the chair with your eyes closed and think in the mind's eye about the geometric figure and its logical properties. So that's rational knowledge. or the knowledge that you have about numeric facts, like that the square root of 81 is 9. That's something that you can understand just by thinking about the numerals involved and the mathematical procedures associated with that calculation. So for you to know these facts about cosine and tangent and the rest don't require any kind of actual use of the eyes or ears or nose or what have you. They just require pure mental contemplation of these abstract ideas. So what rationalists sometimes say is that, look, even animals, non-human animals, can perceive with their five senses. But what they can't do is something that only us humans can do, and that is to use the mind to consider these abstract thoughts about math, logic, geometry, trigonometry, and so forth. So, you might argue that that's kind of the distinctive type of human knowledge anyway, that surpasses what other life forms can possibly understand. For my own view anyway, I think that maybe too much has been made of this classic debate between the empiricists and the rationalists. Empiricists are like David Hume and I don't know, George Berkeley and other guys in British philosophy in the 18th and 19th centuries. And then you've got a lot of rationalists in the early modern era, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz. In my own opinion, though, they're both important, and they're kind of almost complementary halves of the full conception of human knowledge that we have. So yeah, we do have a lot of knowledge from the five senses, but also we have knowledge that doesn't necessarily revolve around the ability to perceive things with your sense organs. Okay, Gabriel, doesn't interpreting your empirical experiences require reason and ideas? Yes, it does. That's a very, very vexing, thorny nest of issues, how to distinguish clearly the empirical from the rational. Some people, for example, say the opposite on the other side. So I told you that the square root of 81 is 9, and that's purely rationalistic. But you could argue, and John Stuart Mill and others have argued, that no, we need empirical experience to even understand what a number is. Like, you have to see things and be able to see multiples of the things with your eyes before you can start to comprehend what it is for something to be 1 or 2 or 3. So yes, partisans of either side of the divide will try to interpret the findings of knowledge in the other according to their preferred system. And so you can say that the root of all rational knowledge is empirical, or it's sort of what you're saying, Gabriel, the root of all empirical knowledge is rational. It's possible to say that, yes. But let's continue from there. It's an interesting thing to think about. The next thing is, well, what are some good, reliable sources of evidence that we can usually count on, even though they are not 100% perfect in every case? Yeah, maybe that's true, Armand. I think that's a truism that makes sense to me too. Let's talk about evidence, though. Okay, so what is simply evidence? Evidence is just something that can prove or disprove a claim. Something that can prove or disprove a claim, that's evidence. So if you wanted to make it seem proven that you're sick, then you give a doctor's note. If you want to make it clear that you're not guilty of something that someone accused you of, you might give receipts to disprove what they've said, right? They said, I think you were at the Capitol on January the 6th, and you're like, well, no, because here is a video of me, whatever, going to Disneyland on that day, and it shows clearly that I couldn't have been in that other state. So anyway, whatever you show or demonstrate in order to try and back up that something is true or to back up that something is not true, that's what evidence is. But what are the kinds of sources of evidence that people generally take to be reliable in the mainstream of cases? So here we go. Major sources of evidence, I'll call this little heading. Okay, so we have at least 4. There's direct experience. Okay, there's testimony. There's memory. And yes, there's also inference. Experience, testimony, memory, and inference. So first of all, with the direct experience. Direct experience is when you yourself perceive something directly. So it's not information that comes to you from an outside source, really. or I mean, if it does, then it's coming from the sense data that you perceive, but it's directly experienced. So say that a person was at campus, if we were having classes in person, and while they're there, they see a fire break out in one of the campus buildings, requiring everybody to be sent home. So if they saw it with their own eyes, they see the flames, they see the smoke, they smell it, they hear the crackling of the wood as it's burning, they experience the event. And so that's probably some of the most powerful evidence there can be, to have the experience yourself. Seeing is believing, as they say, or perceiving by some other means, whether it's sight or not. So direct experience. I mean, if you saw the guy take the package off of the doorstep, like you just happened to be a neighbor, and you looked out of the window and you saw that happen, then you would have very strong evidence because you perceived it. Now, next up, there's testimonial evidence. Testimony is evidence that comes to you from what other people report to you. So what they say to you or what they write. And then you learn about this information because it has been attested to by others. So you could be a person who receives a text message from a friend that's on campus, you're not there, and they say, hey, there's a fire going on over here right now. I'm looking at it right now. You should not come to campus. Now, in that case, what is your evidence, you, the recipient of the text, that there was a fire? Well, it can't be seeing the fire because you weren't present at the scene, so you didn't experience it firsthand. But you've heard from testimony from another individual, and therefore that gives you the reason. So if anyone asked you, how did you know that happened? You'd say, oh, my friend told me, he texted me. Catherine, question, what about with hallucinations where only the person sees? Well, there you go. It's a good thing you point that out, Catherine, because with experience, it's always possible that it can be fallible. We take our experiences to be, unchallengeable and obvious, but it's possible, yes, in some conditions, for your own perception to fail you. A person can see things that are not there or hear things that are not there. Most all of the time, though, our perception works reliably, because if it didn't, there'd be no way that we could ever organize effectively in the world or create technology or build societies. But yes, it's not unprecedented. There can be people in, let's say, with a cognitive disorder or due to the influence of drugs or trauma or certain stressful situations where they can see things or perceive things incorrectly. But I'm just going over these as, like, for the most part, they're reliable. Testimony too. I mean, of course, testimony is not 100% reliable. Sometimes a person can say something or report something to you which is false. In some cases, they do this deliberately because they're trying to misinform you or deceive you. In other cases, they may do it unknowingly because they were misinformed and they therefore pass on misinformation without knowing that it's false. With testimony, sometimes you have to determine how much credibility to assign to the source, because sometimes you have conflicting testimony, and that's frustrating. We see this sometimes in media and in politics all the time, right? Two different sources reporting the opposite of each other. And now it's your determination of which source is the more credible to trust. Say that friend number one texts you and says, hey, there's a fire on campus, so you shouldn't come. 10 minutes later, friend number two texts you and says, have you heard about this rumor that there's a fire? There's no fire, LOL. So now you've heard from two different friends, and they're saying opposite things. In this case, you may have to make a determination as to which is the more reliable source of testimony. Now, testimony is also not just given in these personal interactions like on a text message, but of course, whenever you read something in the news or on the internet or see it broadcasted, you're also receiving testimony in that case. Or when you just open a book and you read about things that have happened in the past, that's testimony as well. That's been preserved from the author to you, the recipient of the information, at some later time. Imagine how much less we would know if we did not have testimony. Basically, if we didn't have language. We would be like the animals who have some knowledge of their immediate experiences and their memories, but they don't have any knowledge about things that are far distant. And so testimony is great because it gives us the ability to have evidence for things that we're not there for. You can't perceive everything, right? You can't perceive all the events of the past. So how is it that you sitting here know that the Declaration was signed in 1776? You certainly weren't there. The reason is because the events have been recorded and then disseminated down through the ages in books and in lessons that we teach. So we can know about things that are far away in space and time by the means of testimony. Okay, and then next we have memory. So memory is what is just being able to recall previously perceived or testified information, to use it for later recall. Here's an example. I'm sure that all of you guys know what you had for dinner last night, assuming you had dinner. And how do you know that? Well, it's not like you're eating it anymore. That experience is over with. It's in the past now. And it's not like anybody testified. That'd be weird. Someone calls you and says, "Hey, yo, you had pizza last night." No, I'm assuming that the reason that you have knowledge of whatever it was that you ate is simply because looking in your mind's eye, you can remember it. You have a memory of it. So memory records and preserves information that we perceive or hear from whatever source for later recall. Memory, though, as reliable as it generally is, can fail. We all know that there's times where we can't remember things or where we remember things incorrectly. So, I mean, in a way, we have to trust our memory. What else could we do? But we should also know that it has the potential to sometimes misfire or incorrectly, indicate the facts. Yeah, we'll talk about false memory in a little bit, and that's kind of interesting. And then finally, there's inference, everybody. So inference is simply when you draw conclusions from some other related information. Suppose that you're walking around in the neighborhood and you hear the fire engine, the siren blaring. Now, what might you infer is happening or has happened? Because you can hear the siren on the fire engine as it races past. You might then come to a conclusion. The fire engine is evidence that something has happened, namely what? The siren that's going off on the fire engine is a source of evidence. You might infer from it that what happened? That there's a fire, right? That there's some kind of fire or emergency happening. Now, what's the evidence? It's not experience because you are not at the scene of the fire, right? You're just hearing a fire truck perhaps miles and miles and miles away from wherever they're going. It's not based on testimony either. And since it's happening live in the moment, it's not a memory, at least not yet. So it's an inference. You're inferring, as they say, from the fact that there's a fire and your background knowledge that where there's a fire engine, usually there's a fire that they're going to this other conclusion. In the case I gave before, you see the footprint of the accused individual and it matches their shoe. So you use that footprint as an inference to the explanation that that person is the culprit. In the case of the footprint, you don't see them commit the crime, so you don't experience that. You don't witness it. You don't hear testimony about it. Maybe no one was there. And if no one was there, there's nothing that you can remember about it, but you could infer from the other evidence that is available. Taking the case of the commission of a crime. I like courtroom examples sometimes, even though it's not all about legal situations, but they're good because we already have an understanding that that's where people present evidence and they have to weigh the evidence before they come to a conclusion. With a court case, if you're the witness to let's say the murder, like you're just standing there and you saw like Jones stab Smith, then you'd say, well, I know that Jones stabbed Smith because I saw it myself with my own eyes. And let's say you're a juror and you're a juror hearing the testimony of the person who saw the events and no one else was there. So you now are using the testimony as the evidence, but it's based on his experience. So you have different evidence than the person giving the testimony. And the person giving the testimony has memory, and sometimes that memory will be scrutinized by the different lawyers, like is it accurate or is there anything wrong with their memory, and so on. Okay, so we've heard about 2 to 4, I should say, reliable sources of evidence. But we should also know one thing about memory, and this is mentioned in the book, false memory. There is the potential in life to sometimes have memories that are incorrect. And when we do, they're called false memories. So that is just when a person thinks they have a memory of something that did not actually happen. When a person thinks they have a memory of something that did not actually happen, that's a false memory. So it can sometimes be, yes, the Mandela effect. I was just going to mention, Gabriel. It's an interesting illustration of the idea of false memory, but it's not limited to that case. So let me get to that in a minute, but start with just some general things. So our memories are, for the most part, reliable, but they're not perfect. I challenge you right now to remember something that happened June 13th in 2019. I mean, you're going to have to go back into your phone and look at posts maybe that you had around the time to have any ability to remember that. So a lot of things just get lost. And the things that do remain, in some cases, the details get blurry. So though our memories are, for the most part, safe and secure, we have to also recognize and get in the habit of checking ourselves for the possibility of incorrect memorial recall. Our memories are famously capable of being shaped by external influences. false memories, studies show, can be generated by asking leading questions. So sometimes when lawyers, police, or investigators ask leading questions, they can induce false memories on those that they're asking the questions of. Um, a famous case of this is from like the late 80s or early 90s. There was I think, kindergarten where a rumor had spread that there was some type of sexual abuse that the teachers did to the students. And it was just a rumor, but because the rumor existed, they had to investigate. So they sent investigators in, and when they were asking these young impressionable children, show us on the doll like where he touched you and tell us what happened when they did these bad things. The questions themselves caused some of these children to confabulate their memories, and that actually resulted in charges which later on had to be reversed, and it really ruined a lot of people's lives. So I'm not trying to say, and I would never say, that we should have a sort of general skepticism about trauma, survivor stories, and the rest. But it's a well-noted point that we still have the potential to confabulate memories, or at least to distort the correct content of a memory. In fact, false eyewitness testimony, mistaken eyewitness testimony, is like the leading cause of mistaken conviction in our legal system. So even when people are present on the scene of something and they really do witness something, they can sometimes misremember the details. And of course, there can be false memories. So Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is one way to think about the concept of false memory. Mandela effect is a term, somewhat of a pop culture term, for when we have collective misremembering of some kind of key event that we all thought we witnessed or thought we experienced. So have any of you ever heard of these examples of the Mandela effect, guys? Like from Star Wars or Berenstain Bears, or okay, so in Star Wars, there's a classic scene where it's basically a battle between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. And, Darth Vader, one of the iconic lines of cinema, people seem to remember that he said, "Luke, I am your father." But that's not actually what he said if you go back to the tape, and it's kind of a little eerie to hear it, but he just says, "No, I am your father." He never says the word Luke. And there's other cases like this too. Magic mirror on the wall instead of mirror, mirror on the wall. Everyone seems to remember those lines differently from, was it Snow White or Sleeping Beauty? But anyway, guys, I think some people go a little bit off the rails and they start speculating that we live in a simulation and that the past is being edited by the programmers and stuff. But really, the more reasonable and straightforward assumption is that psychologically speaking, the brain, the mind, has potential to misremember, even collectively. Like some key event probably caused everyone to have the wrong collective memory of those things in the past. What's my take on deja vu? Yeah, I've heard of deja vu. I don't really know what to think about it. I mean, on one hypothesis, it's evidence that you've lived your same life multiple times. I don't know. That's a weird idea, but there was, I guess, Friedrich Nietzsche, who thought that the possibility of eternal recurrence was real. So maybe, yeah, you have lived infinitely many times the same life, and therefore sometimes you can remember having done the same thing, even though it's a live event. But I would say that it's probably, again, a psychological phenomenon. I'm not sure what triggers it. I would have to study it more. But I'm a physicalist, so I don't really believe that there is a soul, to be honest. So I don't think that that's the explanation of it. But anyway, so false memories. Next, I want to talk to you guys about what are two unreliable sources of evidence that sometimes people do rely on, but they shouldn't. So two unreliable sources of evidence. Yeah, probably so, Gabriel, I would assume so. That's kind of my working hypothesis too. But again, I haven't studied enough of it to have a more definitive position. So here are two unreliable sources of evidence. We have hearsay and anecdote. Okay, so let's start with, I guess, hearsay evidence. So hearsay is testimony, but the problem with it is that it's not firsthand or even secondhand. It's like the information has passed through many or several other people before reaching you. So this is testimony that has passed through several other people before reaching you. So one example of hearsay is like gossip and rumor, so he said, she said, they said, and then finally, some way down the line, you heard it. The problem with hearsay is this. when there's no controls on the transmission of information from one source to another, uh, the information can usually get distorted. Sometimes details get eliminated, and in some cases, additional information that's not a part of the original account get added in. One example of this, maybe have you ever heard of the telephone game, somebody? Anybody? Let me know. Do you know what that one is? Because I'll use this as an example to help explain hearsay. Just checking to see if I have to give the full explanation, or is there anybody that knows about this so-called game? It's a game that's played in classroom settings a lot of time. Yeah, so the way the game goes is you have like a little script, and you give this script to one person on the side of a classroom or whatever, a big group, and then you just instruct them that they have to try and report the full details of it to the next person by whispering it into their ear, and then this information is supposed to snake through the group until it reaches the end. And then you're going to compare the content at the end from the last person with the first person's account of the same. And I've done this it's not possible to do it in a virtual class like this, but when we've had face-to-face classes, I've done this at this stage of the meeting to kind of give an example. And it's always very funny and weird how far off the message can be at the end of even a small group of people, like 20 to 25 or 30. It'll be like a prompt like, Jimmy played soccer for a long time, and then one day he got a spider bite and it made his knee swell up, and that means that he was injured, so he couldn't play anymore. And then by the time it gets through this group, it's like Jimmy got attacked and he's gone. Just something that's completely like very vague, if anything, that's on the same kind of long lines of the narrative. So we owe it to ourselves to not over rely on hearsay. If we have other available sources of evidence that contradict hearsay, then it's better to rely on those. I mean, sometimes if it's all that you have to go by, it can be admissible. It's actually possible that it can be admissible in court, but in court, though, it's not going to be the strongest evidence if it's contradicted by other available sources of evidence. So yeah, it doesn't mean that anybody has an intention to deceive. I know, Armand, you're talking, someone always gets lazy, rushes, or messes up. That's true. But sometimes, we just can't hold in mind all the details as we pass information along. So if you're not hearing something firsthand or secondhand, and you're like way down the line of the chain of transmission, then you might have some skepticism reasonably about the quality of the info. Okay, and then there's anecdotal evidence. Anecdote. This is one that I find is like a big problem in the world we're in today, with the pandemic especially. But anecdotal evidence is this. It's evidence, but it's only based on one person's personal experience. And evidence like that, the problem is that it can oftentimes be skewed, biased, and maybe not reflective of the mainstream of cases. So it's like cherry picking one example that may be an outlier, or at least atypical. So, like someone will say, hey, don't tell me cigarettes are dangerous, man, because you know what? Look at my grandpa. He's like 93 years old, and he's smoked his whole life, and he's still going so strong. And man, I hope I can be as healthy and long living as he is. So why do people have this big deal with cigarettes? They're really not that bad. Well, that's not a great piece of evidence that the person gave, because it's based on just what? The one grandfather's personal experience. And as you guys know, there are some individuals that just have a good luck with cardiovascular, lung, pulmonary disease, and they can escape any of the significant health side effects of some kind of bad habits like smoking. But is this something that is to be expected in the mainstream of cases? I mean, no. A lifelong habit of smoking is generally associated with bad health outcomes. And if you do the research, that's not just based on a random anecdote, you'll see that. And the same thing we're seeing here with the pandemic. There's people that are like, why are we changing our life and our society and making everything different just because we have this virus? I mean, I know a guy, my friend, and he got it, and he didn't even feel any symptoms, and it didn't last very long. So we're really going to, shut down everything just because of this weak virus that doesn't even really kill that many people or hurt them. But that's, again, it's anecdotal evidence. It's based on one person's case. And if you just extrapolate out to the bigger picture, you can see that hundreds of thousands of people are dying, many of them healthy, that would never have died otherwise except for the effect of the virus. So anecdotal evidence. Someone tells you, don't work at that job. I worked there and it was the worst place ever. So you don't apply. But now you don't give yourself the opportunity. And if you had talked to maybe the other members of the workforce, all the other employees would be like, oh yeah, that one guy, he was the worst employee ever, so don't take it from him. we love this place and it's a great place to work. So don't just go off anecdotes, right? If you hear the anecdote and it's confirmed by other reliable sources, then fine, but it shouldn't be your only source of evidence. Oftentimes people will accept a lower standard of proof just because they want something to be true, but you got to try and not let yourself do that. Okay, so hearsay and anecdote. The next thing then is this. The textbook talks about different factors that you can use to evaluate the testimony of experts. So 4 factors to consider about so-called experts. Okay, so a good source of evidence for the most part is to have access to experts that will just tell you things about their subject of expertise. But not all experts are created equal, and some people claim expertise when they don't really have it. So we would also like to have a good sense of how do we weigh the credibility of experts or measure that. And here are 4 factors that you can use to help you do that. So we've got education, experience, accomplishments, and reputation. Okay, so let's just go down through these. First of all, to the expert that's talking to you. Question, what is their education? Like, so how much do they have? Where did they acquire it? And on what topic did they study? So educational attainment, like there's a different level of education, whether the person has just got a bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD. So consider the level of education. Generally speaking, the higher level of attainment, the more credible the view would be. And then also consider the nature of the institution from which they obtain their education. You know, some people get like kind of just these fake online universities to give them a master's degree, quote unquote, and they're not even accredited institutions. So it's a master's degree in name only, and it doesn't really reflect any serious degree of credibility. So you want to consider not just how much, but where, and then also what the topic is. Some people that are highly educated in one topic, you'll use as a source of evidence for something else that they're not an expert in. So you have to consider all those factors. And if you have 2 different experts with different views, then you can use this as a tie-breaking factor sometimes if they don't agree. Now, experience is next. Experience just means how much time has the individual spent making judgments in the field with the education that they have. So that's logically distinct because you can have, say, the highest quality institution from like an elite, the highest quality education from like an elite institution, but you haven't yet been working very long. So you're just straight out of grad school, just getting started maybe. And some people can have a lot of experience, but no formal education. So obviously these 2 things are independent, but the best case scenario is someone highly educated with relevant knowledge, and they're also very experienced and they've worked for a long time. We also have to talk about accomplishments. So that means, does this individual have any awards, titles, honors, publications maybe that further reinforce the credibility they have in their subject of expertise? To the extent that they have these professional accomplishments and recognitions, that just adds another layer of credibility and trust to what they say to you. And then reputation, meaning how is this person perceived by other professionals in their field? You know, so some people have great education, a lot of experience, but the problem is that they're regarded as like a kind of fringe, like outlier type figure, black sheep type figure within their own profession. So you want to also keep that in view, whether this person is somehow respected by their colleagues and peers or thought to be an outlier that doesn't offer views that sit within the mainstream of the field. Okay, so sometimes we deal with experts that offer us conflicting conclusions. And when they do, you would do well, I guess, to refer to these different factors in making your judgment about their credibility. It's a little frustrating, isn't it, when experts can't agree on something, when there's no expert consensus yet? And sometimes we see that, like, for example, does drinking like a little bit of wine each night promote heart health? I've seen some studies that say it does, but then I've seen other studies which say based on our methodology, we find the opposite, that it has no effect or it has a negative effect. What are you going to do when you see these different studies that are telling us opposite things. Well, again, sometimes you just have to suspend judgment and wait for further confirmation or wait for a consensus to establish. In some cases, you might go out on a limb and take favor or take side with one of the different studies or research findings because you thought that that professional expertise was different than the other person. Okay, so talk about experts and credibility. Yeah, so next I just want to talk to you all about what are some different research resources. That's what the book goes into next. Research resources. So, sorry, I didn't spell the word resources correctly. Yeah, research resources. So to do research, you have to find information, right? If there's anything in the world right now you want to know about, or even outside the world, and you don't know about it yet, you're going to have to educate yourself to learn about it. You're going to have to go out and find the information because it's not inside of you yet. So where do you go, though, to get the information that you want to be better informed, better knowledgeable about the world? Well, there's many sources, but the textbook at least offers us a good little range of options. One of them is the library. Okay, so I mean, I know that we've had a pandemic and we still do, and a lot of physical buildings and public spaces have been closed, but if and when you have access to a library, it's always a great place to find facts and information. They're quiet, they're academic, they're free. They've existed for so long, so they're a great benefit to humanity throughout the generations. And you can request materials on any number of different topics. As a student, in the best case scenario, you have access to a school library, and if you don't have that, there's always the public library, Library of Congress, and so forth. If there's a topic that you want to research on and it's not in the collection, then usually there's an interlibrary loan system where you can request that book to be shipped over to the one that's best suitable to your location. So library, nice place to get some facts and info. Aside from that, another source to refer to are academic journals. Okay, academic journals. So people in the academy, professors and researchers, when they do really good research, they try and put it into a venue like an academic journal. And there are professional academic journals on almost every topic. Well, I don't even need to say on almost, on every topic that you could possibly imagine under the sun. So you're going to see academic journals dedicated to science, history, philosophy, literature, math, chemistry, architecture, engineering, and the list goes on. Now, to get published in one of these academic journals, and I can speak from experience because I've published a few articles and books and things, but the process to get a piece in one of these journals is pretty difficult because you have to submit it to their referees, and then it has to be peer reviewed. And there's a very high rejection rates, especially at the more elite journals. So most pieces and articles don't get accepted, but if they do, and if you pass through that gauntlet of peer review and scrutiny, then that kind of ensures that the things that make the printed page of an academic journal are just the highest quality, well-vetted research. So that's always a good place to go for cutting edge, state-of-the-art research on any given topic that you can imagine. But I would say, to be fair, it's sometimes a little bit of an intimidating thing to get into because this is written for an audience of like fellow specialists. And so in a way, it can be high-level reading. But if you're willing to take a little bit of an intellectual challenge, then certainly that's a great place to do any type of research. Some of these academic journals can be requested at a library. Sometimes they can be found online. In some cases, they place a membership kind of paywall restriction on access to their content, which I don't necessarily like because I think open access to information, academically anyway, it should be the priority. But anyway, those are another source of good research materials. There's also government documents. Okay, so now we have all these like government agencies, right, that have professional obligations to inform the public about the topic within their agency's jurisdiction. So if you want to know stuff about crime statistics, you can see the Department of Labor, the Department of Justice providing those crime statistics. If you want to know about labor statistics, you could look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Or if you want to know facts about the current environmental situation, you could look at the EPA. and on and on and on. So, obviously we, the taxpayer, pay for the agencies to do their great work. And that means we should take full advantage of it to be informed citizens. Some government documents are also made available to the public, not through the official agencies, but through declassification or through leaks to the media, and sometimes through Freedom of Information Act requests. Government documents that were previously not for public consumption become available to the public. So that's another great place to do research if you can gain access to those. Now, of course, there's the internet. And, probably for most people, especially, younger people, but I think at this point in time, and it's pretty much everyone, the internet is a handy tool to just engage in quick research on almost any topic. Just do a quick Google search, right? And you can just go down the rabbit hole of search results to find more information. But, proceed with caution, because there's a lot of propaganda, misinformation, and sensationalist stuff that's out there on the internet. So you kind of have to make sure that you navigate through that minefield of false information to get the right facts. When you're looking at stuff on the internet, try to see if it can be confirmed through other mainstream and available sources of evidence, because there's too many people out there that only look at like social media postings or blogs and stuff or YouTubers to get the facts they think are credible. And a lot of that's just nonsense. Okay, there's also the expert interview. Obviously, we talked about that sort of in passing, but much more to say. If you have access to experts, and as students, you do, at least insofar as you're students in these classes where the professor is an expert on their topic. So, pick their brain, sit down with them. If they let you record, then record or take good notes. And interviewing an expert is a great way to do research, and it has a little bit of a personal interaction aspect, which is fun for those of us that don't mind that. And then one more thing that's listed under the research resources. In my view, I thought this one didn't necessarily need to make the cut, but since it's in the book, I'll refer to it briefly. And that's just having research by looking into the dictionary or encyclopedia. That would be a very small amount of research, right? If you're just looking for what a single word or concept means, maybe, yeah, then the dictionary or encyclopedia would be a great place to go. For more extensive research, you're probably going to have to look into some of these more broad sources than just that. Okay, now, when you find a piece of information for research from any of these different sources, you can further interrogate the credibility of that item. And the book gives us this like 5-point test to evaluate the accuracy or credibility of a piece of research. And this is the somewhat awkwardly named CRAP test, okay? They're trying to make it a memorable, probably a little bit funny acronym. And so it is CRAAP. And each of the letters in the word stands for like a different metric that you would evaluate a piece of research information with. So let's go through those 5 letters. First of all, the letter C is for currency. And that just refers to how current is the information. So currency, not in the sense of like, money currency, but currency in the sense of the term current, like how up to date and recent is the information that you're looking at. Suppose that somebody's trying to research climate and they look at like meteorological data from the 50s, and the data shows like that there's no real change in global temperatures from 1950 to 1960. And they use this as a reason to say that global warming is not real. The problem with their source, though, is that it's not current anymore. It's not, so most of the heating trend and the rising sea levels has all happened closer to the end of the 20th century and especially the beginning of the 21st now. So that's too dated. It's too out of date to be reasonable evidence to use in this research project. I see sometimes people on social media, they'd be posting links to articles that are like 10 years old, but they're talking about a current day issue or situation. So for the most part, with some exceptions, you want your information to be as up to date and current as possible. Of course, if you're doing research on like a historical time period by looking at primary sources from that period, that's a little different. But aside from this, currency helps. The second letter, R, is for relevance. And that just asks us to consider, is the information related to the topic that you want to research? So Obviously, you have to have information you're looking at that is on topic for the thing you're trying to research. Otherwise, it's clearly not the right sort of thing to use. Say, for example, somebody's looking at the fact that we've had more intense hurricanes in the past 20 years. More of them happening that are more destructive during hurricane season, and they're trying to understand why. So they do other research, and they also notice that over the same time period, divorce rates have steadily increased. So they say, you know what? I think these things are connected. Somehow there's a causal connection. People getting divorced and more bad hurricanes happening at the same time, maybe that's causing the hurricanes. But obviously, that would be a bad piece of research because the two things are completely unrelated. I mean, one is about weather patterns, meteorology. The other is about the sociological sort of pattern of matrimony, making up, breaking up, and stuff like that. But these two things can't possibly influence each other. So, I mean, I would think this goes without saying that you have to have research information that's on topic for what you're trying to study. But in a way, it's not going without saying because you'd be surprised what people actually put out there in the world these days, and they claim this is their research, but it's not even at all on topic or related to the information they're trying to study. Okay, and then the first letter A is for authority, which just refers to what authority is behind this piece of information. Okay, so like consider the source basically. What is the source from which the information was obtained? And does this source have any kind of credible authoritative knowledge about it? This is also something that I see happening too much in our world right now, right? And it's like people almost are getting things backwards. So we have all these elite institutions with scientific professionals. And many people, in the pandemic, I guess because they just don't like the fact that a pandemic happens and that, you have to do things about it, but they will disagree with and disregard professional guidance. But then they do go to like YouTube and they hear YouTubers and bloggers and just people with no credible opinions or people who have, skills and talents in completely different fields. They're not physicians, they're not scientists, and they're not public policy experts. So, consider whether this is an authoritative source of information or is it just somebody telling you what you want to hear. And then the final letter A is for accuracy. That just refers to, is the information correct, accurate, reliable. Sometimes people look for information online or anywhere to try and do research, but they don't notice that it's not even sometimes intended to be factual. Sometimes people post things that are like just satire or that are, done to make humor. And they use this as though this is some kind of real research. So consider the accuracy, and you can always double check that against other available sources of information. Like, don't just take your facts from one source. See if others can corroborate or contradict it. And then finally, the last letter is P for purpose. And that just asks this question: what is the purpose that this information was presented? Okay, so sometimes you have to consider the motive behind the dissemination of the info itself. Is it just there to inform, or is it there to sell a product, or is it there to advance some type of ideological agenda or goal? Knowing the purpose for which the information was created will give you a good idea as to whether it's to be trusted or how credible it might be. Someone will be saying, don't worry about the vaccines. These vaccines don't help you. But by the way, buy this supplement and I'm selling it and I can sell it to you at a good rate. And this might help you. Okay, well, can you really trust this person? Because they're trying to sell a product on you. And so they may have a profit motive that lies behind their desire to present this information, not just to help you out. Sometimes people want to put information out there to troll. Sometimes they want to put it out there to make disinformation. So you have to consider the reasons behind the provision of the info itself. For me, if some scammer is trying to tell me, like, don't listen to the experts because I know better, and by the way, I'm selling a book, no way, I'm not going to read that. I'm not going to believe that because this person's trying to simply take my money and also make me worse off by giving me false information. So then, yeah, the next thing to talk about are cognitive and perceptual errors in our judgment and in our thinking. So before I launch into those cognitive and perceptual errors, though, I don't think I'll have enough time with the remaining like 5 minutes, 8 minutes to go over much. But I think I'll just briefly touch on one example that's mentioned in the book, and it is the War of the Worlds radio broadcast from 1938. So first off, this is something that happened October 30th, 1938. So Peter, you know a little bit about it? Anybody can give a quick little brief on what happened, and then I'll just give more details from there.
It's okay if I use my mic first?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and use that mic.
So basically, during this time, people were very trustworthy of whatever they heard on the radio. Everything was basically, the truth to them. Mm-hmm. So one day, the radio was talking about how there was an alien invasion, mm-hmm. and there were these giant, machines dropping down, and they were everywhere. Mm-hmm. And everyone was booking. Everyone was getting into cars. There was so much traffic. Mm-hmm. They were all believing, like, oh my gosh, the world's ending. It's mm-hmm. the war of the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were trying to escape. And even a farmer said he saw one of those alien machines when it was just like a water container or something.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. So I'll add to that, but you got it right pretty much. So let me just set the stage. It's 1938. There's no TV yet. That's coming in like 10 years away after World War II pretty much. But before then, the era of TV hadn't started, and it was the era of radio. So Americans, finishing work, going home, would chill out around the radio, and they would use that as their source for like entertainment, news, sports, and all the rest. So sometimes you're listening to the radio, you're hearing color commentary for like a baseball game. Other times you're listening to it and you're hearing news reports. And sometimes they would do voice acting for like, entertainment purposes, like acting out the plot of a little novel or script. Well, on this one case, there was basically a voice acting is in October 30th. So I may be getting the fact wrong, but I think it was also kind of like, spooky, like lead up to Halloween kind of theme. But anyway, this was a science fiction novel that was being voice acted by the radio broadcaster. And it was War of the Worlds, which is a plot that has Martian aliens coming down to Earth and invading the planet and taking it over and stuff. And so some people tuning in maybe a little later to the broadcast, having misinterpreted it as real news, thought that this was a factual report, that there were an alien invasion happening. And it caused a little bit of a panic. Yeah, some people were freaking out, and it even shaped the way people were perceiving things. Because as I think you said there, Dalton, there were individuals that said, oh, wait, I can see the flying saucer. Don't you see way off in the distance? That little blurry object, that's one of them. They're coming for us. And I heard the accounts are varied. Some people, I've even heard some people went as far as to commit suicide because they feared the impending arrival of spaceships and they want to die on their feet or, not at the hands of the aliens or something. I'm not sure how much of those accounts are accurate, but whatever the case is, there's a valuable lesson to learn from this. And that is that the way we perceive reality and the world can be powerfully shaped by our social influences, right? So absent this broadcast, nobody would have thought this was happening. But there again, it shows us that in groups and in society, we sometimes think differently and make judgments differently than we would if we were left to our own. So we have to keep in mind the power that the mind has to make errors in judgment and perception. And if we know what those errors are, then we can do a little bit of a better job monitoring our own habits and trying our best to prevent them to the extent possible. So the only last thing that we'll have to finish with when we come back on Tuesday after the weekend with chapter 4 is just the last few definitions of cognitive and perceptual errors in thinking. And that's a good point, John. Yeah, social media can change a person's values. And so these are lessons that I think are really valuable for people in your current group and your generation to learn. So anyway, though, we're coming out to the end of our class time. So what I'll do, as I have done before, is to just post the these lectures to our to our Canvas page, and I'll also put up the link for the office hours if anyone wanted to show up for that when it's between 4 and 5 on these Thursdays. I'll also be sending the study guide for the midterm review session, so you can take a few looks at it before we come back on Tuesday. And so that's how it's basically going to be. Post those things for you, and then I'll see you on Tuesday after the weekend at our next meeting. It seems like this YouTube thing has worked pretty well, and I can guarantee that you're going to get a lot better playback when I post this video to the Canvas. So we'll see how it works. I mean, I actually don't mind the dual platform thing. I hope it's not too confusing to folks, but I kind of like how you have the option, like how Dalton was just able to use the microphone and we could hear him. But you can also interact in the YouTube live chat, and then there's a better way of saving it. So we'll just try and keep being innovative and seeing if we can go dual platform when it works and when it makes sense. But I'll be in touch with you through Canvas announcements, and you'll be able to see whatever we do there with plenty of time to go. All right, guys, so I'm going to have to close this stream. Let me know that you're good to go and say your goodbyes, I suppose. Then when you do, I'll end the 2 streams, YouTube first and then Zoom. Okay, are we all right? The chat has a ton of delay. Yes, there is a delay on the YouTube chat, Gabriel, but it's tough to satisfy everybody because I have some students saying they really want this chat. Nonetheless, Gabriel, don't worry too much about the lag. It's just a small thing. If it's not good, though, we'll think about it. But all right, guys, have a great one, and I'll see you back. Take care.